Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. We are holding this as an informal meeting so we continue to meet remotely whilst COVID remains a public health risk. My name is Councillor Alex Anderson, Chair of the Children Education Policy and Accountability Committee. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, and I'd like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points before we begin. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Please wait until I call on you to speak, and please pop your hands up so I can see that you wish to make a comment or intervention. And please can officers introduce themselves before speaking for the first time and ideally have their cameras on. I want to extend my thanks to the previous chair, Councillor Sharon Holder, who did a brilliant job as the chair before me, and I want to welcome our new member, Councillor Mercy Ume, who I know will be a brilliant addition to this committee. So item 1 on the agenda, appointment of co-opted members for 2021-2022. Does the committee note the appointment of co-opted members for 21 and 22? I can't.
Noted.
Good. Yes, accepted. Lovely. Welcome to the co-opted members. I'm going to take that as a unanimous agreement. Item 2, minutes and matters arising. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? I know I have been sent through the list of mental health resources, so thank you so much for that. One of the items we talked about was having that publicly accessible, so on a website or somewhere, but I will pick up that conversation offline. If we could start thinking about a way of having that as a centralised resource, that would be brilliant. And then youth council invites with the other outstanding item. I don't know if I've been sent those, but again, let's have that conversation offline. Are there any other minutes or any other matters arising or issues with the minutes? Lovely, that's what I like to hear. Brilliant. And so do members agree to note the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of March 2021?
Noted.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed.
Thank you. Item 3, apologies for absence. No apologies for absence have been received. I think there was an apology for lateness from Councillor Richardson, who may or may not be here, but if she's certainly on her way if she's not here yet. And are there any declarations of interest from any of the members?
No.
Great, easy. Right, item 5, rattling through these. Public participation, no questions have been received. And so that takes on to our first substantive item, number 6, special educational needs and disabilities update. Can I ask Mandy Lawson to introduce this item, please?
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much. So I'm Mandy Lawson. I am the Assistant Director Education and Disabilities, and I work in the Education Department of Children's Services in Hammersmith and Fulham. So I'll be presenting this update. You have had a really rather comprehensive slide deck, and that was circulated in lieu of a report, because actually a report would have been very, very detailed if we'd put it in a report format. So I'm hoping that you are happy with this slide deck that was circulated, and I'm now just going to present a summary of that slide deck, and then we'll take questions. Is that okay? Now let's see if my technology will support me with this. I'm going to share. I will be asking colleagues to join me. Is that coming up?
Yes, it does.
Lovely, thank you. So we are presenting on the special education needs and disability system, and I particularly use the word system because special education needs and disability is a system. It is the whole system of support in what we call the local area. So the local area is the boundaries of Hammersmith and Fulham, and the boundaries of Hammersmith and Fulham, including the delivery of education, health and social care across our schools, our early years providers, our health provision, our CCG, our local authority, etc. So you will see that we have obviously schools and early years provision are at the absolute heart of our SEND system. So from the working through early years, SEN support, so that's children who don't have education, health and care plans, children who have got identified special educational needs in our schools, through to then those children who do then require statutory assessment and statutory education, health and care plans. And I'll go on in a little while to talk to you about about the data and the difference between those data wise. But children with SEN support are a very large part of our SEND system. We then, through our education, health and care system, we ensure that children have statutory plans that ensure that all of the provision that they need is included, and that there is a statutory responsibility for that and those needs to be met. We work very, very closely with colleagues in health, and health are absolutely fundamental to the SEND system. And we have Alison Markwell with us today, who will introduce herself in a little while, and she is our health representative here today with us. But actually our work with health is quite fundamental in the SEND system. Health are responsible for assessment and diagnosis, so children will be identified as having special educational needs. They will on many occasions have a diagnosis. We will have children who have social, emotional and mental health needs. We will have children who have autism. We have children who have diagnosed disabilities. The breadth is very, very wide. We obviously then through health have our mental health services, and we've talked before about our mental health services, and we'll be back again to talk about mental health services in the future, but health are fundamental to that part of the system. The SEND system also includes obviously all of the work that we are doing in relation to supporting our young people move towards adulthood, develop their independence and move towards employment. Our absolute aspiration is for as many of our children and young people who have identified special educational needs and disabilities to be on a pathway to independence and employment. And all of the work we do from early years all the way through the system is about leading to that aspiration. Working within and across our SEND system are our whole range of social care interventions and services. So we have our early help interventions, we have our children and young people service. So that's our children who may well be subject to child in need plans, child protection, children who are looked after. And then we have our specialist disability team. And then sitting then across again the pathways to independence, we have our social workers that work and support children in their transition from children through to adulthood. It is a whole system across 0 to 25, and while many people think SEND is EHCPs, it is so much more, and that's the information that we have presented in the wider PAC, and we'll present a little more today. So moving on, we have our borough profile. So we have in our data, we return our data on an annual basis through a return which is called the SEN2 return. So that's a published data set which we collate in January, comes out give or take in March. So the data we're presenting today is the data that was presented through that SEN2 return. That's our statutory return. So we have our pupils with SEN in all of our schools in Hammersmith and Fulham. So 16.3% of all of the children in our schools in Hammersmith and Fulham have identified SEN. As you will see that in our school age population, that 3.3% of our children actually have an EHCP, and that's our resident population. So we have slightly less, but only slightly less than the inner London statistic in relation to children in our school age population of residents who have an EHCP. So give or take, we're in line. So you will see the difference there between the 3.3 and the 16.3, which identifies that the remaining children are SEN support, and that SEN support cohort are the cohort that we are as much interested in and need to continue to focus our support and our attentions on, as well as that much smaller population who have the statutory plans. The next set of data here is a slightly complicated set of data, which really relates to the number of children who are out of borough, who are educated in our schools. So we have 29% of our out of borough population in our schools have SEN, and in the same way, and we don't have that reported here, but in the same way that we import, that's our technical term, we import children from other boroughs because parents can choose where they send their children. So we have 29% of other boroughs' children coming into our schools, but equally we have an awful lot of our children going to mainstream schools, predominantly out of borough. And in our special schools, we have 49% of the children on roll in our special schools are from out of borough. It's really important to note that we are properly funded for that. There is a funding formula which ensures that the money comes into our allocation of high needs block. That's the money that pays for special education. So while it appears to be a very stark figure, actually we are not disadvantaged by that figure, and in fact we're probably advantaged by it because it enables us to have a good range of special schools in Hammersmith and Fulham, so that there is a choice and a range of provision. Attendance is obviously a key factor. Children don't learn if they're not in school, and it's really, really important that we log attendance. So we have above average attendance for our children with EHCPs compared to the national, and SEN support, our attendance is equally in line with the national. So that these are good statistics. The box at the bottom is one of our key performance indicators, and our key performance indicator is how quickly from the point of referral into the statutory service an EHC plan is assessed and drafted and then issued, so that children receive their support as quickly as possible, and 20 weeks is the statutory deadline. So in 2017 I have to say, along with many other local areas, but we were a very poor performer in 2017, and our performance has drastically increased over the years through the work that we have done collectively across the SEN system in Hammersmith and Fulham. I have to alert you that it's likely not to be the same for the next year, but that is a massive impact of COVID on our deliverables. But we're working through that, and again, that's a national problem. But we are very pleased with our KPI and the improvement over the years to that 80% of turnaround, which means that children get the support that they need as quickly as possible. I won't go through each of these, but you can see that we are above the national average on all of the attainment and outcome measures, which is something we are really very proud of. The one that's in amber is identification or numbers of children on roll, and we have an unusual scenario in Hammersmith and Fulham that we have a lot of special school provision, and we don't have children who are in units. So a unit would be on mainstream roll and having enhanced provision in the mainstream school. So just the way our special school are set up in Hammersmith and Fulham means that we understand why we are below the national average on that piece, and we have a big piece of work going forwards, working with our schools to create enhanced provision to enable our children to stay in their mainstream schools. And Satwinder in a moment will talk a little bit more about that. However, before we move on to getting a bit more detail on our types of provision, it's really important to note how proud we are in Hammersmith and Fulham of our co-production. Co-production is a core value in Hammersmith and Fulham, and it's a core value of the SEND reforms and the expectations of the Children and Families Act, which is the legislation that drives the SEND reforms. We have worked with Parents Active throughout the implementation of the SEND reforms, and we continue to work really closely with Parents Active, regular meetings, regular focus groups. We have our parent reference group, which is our termly meeting where we review our strategic work together, as well as having multiple focus groups and thematic meetings to ensure that we are really listening to and responding to the views and experiences of our parents. However, the thing that we are also just as proud of, and this has been a significant improvement over the last year, and actually it's a real benefit from the pandemic and the impact of COVID and the opportunity to work remotely, is that we've really been able to move forwards on ensuring that our youth council and our youth voice network is inclusive, and we've made huge strides on our inclusive provision for in getting our young people with special educational needs fully included in our youth voice, and again that we've had recent presentations to demonstrate those successes. I think I've probably covered everything else there. Satwinder, may I hand over to you to talk about SEND transformation and the next slide? Satwinder, are you there?
Yes, apologies. Thank you, Matthew. I was just going to pick up and continue with some of the aspirational and positive outcomes that you've described, Mandy, earlier in the slides. What we continue to do is aim to work on our continuous improvement cycle, which is underpinned by 4 key strands. All our transformation programme of work, which is under the umbrella of our high needs block, but a programme that we had started way back in 2018 and continuously review and strengthen. The 4 strands that all our work is underpinned by is high effective identification, early identification assessment, looking to support SEN, children at SEN support, so children who don't necessarily meet the thresholds or have educational healthcare plans, but to promote positive inclusion and outcomes for all children. Key aim of our work is the transition pathways into adulthood, which I think has had significant impact already, and high needs commissioning and joint commissioning, which also really plays a key role in the work that we are doing in terms of investing in new services, whilst the programme is looking to bring our high needs block position back in, but we are also looking to invest in services to promote early intervention and inclusion for all children. And a couple of examples of that investment are outlined here, one of which we aim to launch in September is the new language advisory service, which will aim to support children with speech, language and communication at all ages and stages, starting very much in the early years and moving on. The other area that we're investing in is our ASD outreach offer. We are looking to create a centralised coordination function for all our outreach services so that we can fully support our schools in meeting the needs of all children at SEN support. The next slide, Mandy. Some of the work that we've been doing has been, as I've described, started way back in 2018, and we are now building on that by having the early years teams working back with us in the local authority. We've been able to really strengthen that work, starting with some very clear pathways in collaboration with our health colleagues, such as health visitors, midwives, speech therapists in the early years, supporting our PVIs, which we'll talk about later, and our early years settings, our nurseries. We've delivered a range of programmes which are very evidence-based with the NSPCC, but also around autism. Our educational psychologists have delivered training for childminders to increase our capacity to provide wraparound services for our children with additional needs. We worked very recently, we've run a series of workshops with our Early Intervention Foundation Trust to get a full understanding and a full audit of our multi-agency working so that we can identify where our strengths are and where there are opportunities for further improvement in our multi-agency working across the early years. And we've relaunched additional funding to support our settings for children with emerging SEN. We continue to work at SEN support with our schools. We've recently launched an ordinarily available document which highlights for all schools what support they can access for all children at different ages and stages, which is a continuous piece of work. We update it as we identify new services that we develop, and we work with our SENCOs and our schools to ensure that those are reviewed regularly. And we've recently completed a piece of work with our schools, again, to understand the impact that our commissioned outreach services have on the outcomes for our young people. And we've received very, very positive feedback on some of those services that are very highly commended and recognised for the impact it has on building capacity in schools and increasing teachers' knowledge, expertise on supporting all children in their classrooms. The educational psychologists, along with our Inspire service, which is a team made of specialist teachers who are additionally qualified in key areas such as ASD, specific learning difficulties, hearing and vision, are very actively supporting all schools through both training. They've also been doing some work with families through the lockdown via Zoom and other means. We've supported schools in training. We've delivered a fair amount of training around trauma, loss and bereavement and critical incident support. And we continue to do that, and we continue to be responsive to schools when they request additional support, especially as we return to full-time face-to-face teaching and assessments. And all schools now have access to NASON, which is an online resource for all schools to access, which provides them with gold standard of resources, alongside our specialist input and resources that we provide to schools. Is that sufficient?
Thank you, Satwinder. I am trying to move on to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So thank you for that, Satwinder. So education, health and care plans have three key elements. So these are the statutory documents. If you recall, about 3.3% of our school age population will have an education, health and care plan. And these are the plans that can be issued theoretically 0 to 25, but in reality 3, 4, 5 is usually the starting age, and sometimes children will be identified later on. So we may have children in primary stage, and very occasionally we will have children in the secondary stage, and even more occasionally we may well have young people who've entering their adulthood who may be identified as requiring an education, health and care plan. And we are duty bound through our specialist education, health and care planning service to undertake a statutory assessment. And our service, the role of the service is to coordinate that assessment. So the assessment is owned by the system. We gather education advice, we gather health advice, we gather social care advice, and pull all of that information into the education, health and care plan. And that plan is then reviewed annually. And enables the local authority, the school education provider, the parent and the young people to be very clear about the provision that has been identified as necessary to meet the child's needs. So it is a very structured statutory process. As of January, in our last return, we had 1,246 education, health and care plans. And over the years, the 3-year profile, we've had an increase of 13%, which is slightly above the London average of a 12% increase. There is an increase across the piece. Multiple reasons for the increase. The SEND reforms, which were the change in the legal parameters and the way in which we work, came into force in 2014, which extended the age range of statutory provision of education from what was then 18, 19, the point at which children and young adults left special school, up to 25. So an increase in the age range, and there are multiple other factors which have led to the increase in the allocation of the HCPs. We've got the word demand there, but I feel very uncomfortable with the word demand. And as a parent of a child with an EHCP, I certainly don't want to see that this is demand. It's just the way we describe the identification of need and the way in which we issue these plans in line with our statutory duties. And we are very proud in Hammersmith and Fulham of ensuring that we do everything we can to deliver against our statutory duties. I'm going to skip over health because I'm going to ask Alison to come in a moment and just go on to social care. There are two elements of the social care piece. There are the broader piece in relation to all children. All children may have a social care input. There may be early help. There may well be children who require support in relation to being children in need, children who require child protection plans. What we may well refer to as the mainstream children and family services, our children and young people services, and also a very discrete group, but a group that we heard about last night at the Health and Wellbeing Board, which is our children who have offended and are open to our youth offending service. And there is a very clear targeted offer of support for our children who have offended and are being supported through our youth offending service. So that's our generic social care offer. And then we have the social care offer that actually describes the D in SEND, which is our social care services for children who have disabilities. And in Hammersmith and Fulham, we have a children with disabilities social work team. We have our access to short breaks. We have our Stephen Wiltshire Centre. We have our children's home in Hammersmith and Fulham, which enables our children with the most complex disabilities to stay living in Hammersmith and Fulham and to attend their local schools. And then within our social care work, obviously, we then have the work that we do in supporting children to transition into adulthood. We are working on improving and strengthening the role of social care in our education, health and care planning, and we are creating a role which is a designated social care officer role. So that is an officer who is strategically responsible for ensuring that every component part of the social care system understands their responsibilities to children with special educational needs and disabilities. We work closely with our virtual school for our children who are looked after. Many of our children who are in our care are looked after am I still here? Apologies, my screen just went funny.
You are for me.
Oh,
yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to check. So a number of our children who are looked after may well not be placed in Hammersmith and Fulham, but we still have a responsibility for ensuring that their special educational needs are met wherever they are. So if they're in a foster carer who lives in RBKC or lives in Westminster or lives in Brent, we work with our virtual school to ensure that we are meeting the special educational needs of our looked after children. And our role as corporate parents through our education, health and care process is really, really fundamental to our work. And we have the last point, really, it's all a bit slightly in the wrong order there, but we've established an integrated key working service. So that's our key working service that sits in the Stephen Wiltshire Centre and works with children at that first point of identification. So we will receive referrals from our colleagues in health. A child has been identified as having special education needs, as having a disability, and a referral will come through, and we will ensure that we are triaging and ensuring that families, where they need it, know how to navigate the system and know where to go for help and support. Alison, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little about health in the educational health and care system?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mandy, and good evening, everyone. My name is Alison Markwell, and I'm the Head of Joint Health Partnerships and the Senior Designated Clinical Officer for SEND in Hammersmith and Fulham. And my post is joint funded by the local authority and the CCG, which I think is a real sign of that partnership working across the agencies, and is unusual in sort of being so. So it's a definite plus in terms of the local area. So I was just going to really touch on some of health's key responsibilities in relation to the special educational need system and that partnership working that Mandy has already alluded to. So one of the things that health professionals are required to do is to contribute to the education and healthcare needs assessments. So when a parent or a school asks for an EHC needs assessment, lots of information is gathered, and there's a responsibility that health provide information. So that's always from a paediatrician if there's one involved, and also from other health professionals. That might be CAMS, it might be therapies, it might be community nursing, and that information is then part of the forms part of the decision as to whether a plan needs to be issued for a child, that they need statutory special educational provision in order to meet their needs. And you may or may not be familiar with the layout of an education, health and care plan, but there are various sections in it, and anything in section F, the local authority is responsible for ensuring is put in place, and anything in section G, sorry, my section is wrong, but section G is anything that health are responsible for. So that might be things like physiotherapy, it might be mental health provision. So the CCG is responsible for making sure that if those needs and provision have been identified, that there's the resources available to meet those needs. One of the things that the Children and Families Act introduced was the concept of a designated clinical officer or a designated medical officer, and in our local area that was really embraced. And we've had a full-time designated clinical officer since 2014. We were very unusual in having that post in place. I fulfilled it originally working across the footprints with Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster. And now we have two posts. I cover the senior part of that role, and we have someone who still does the operational work, and she has the footprint across the wider sort of local area, which the CCG still operates on from that basis. And the role of the DCO is very similar to Mandy has described, the social care officer, the DISCO, and really with an expectation that they supported the clinical commissioning group and our health providers to really understand the impact of the Children and Families Act and the SEND Code of Practice. That what did that mean for them as commissioners, and what did that mean in terms of our local health teams. So some of that has been about workforce development, in terms of ensuring that our quality committees and other senior meetings in the organisation receive regular reports on progress around the implementation of and now the embedding of the reforms, being a key lead around our preparation for our SEND inspection that we had a couple of years ago and will be re-inspected in due course, acting as a point of contact and advice, and generally being part of the glue to hold the system together. Interestingly, that the Children and Families Act introduced a statutory duty for the CCG to work in partnership with the local authority through joint commissioning. And so we have a joint commissioning strategy locally and joint commissioning priorities that include things like our mental health work, our ASD work, and work on therapies. So we spend a lot of time working together, and obviously that, as Mandy's previously said, is also done with our parent carer forum, so that we truly have got a joint approach to understanding and hopefully meeting the needs of our children and young people, not just those with education, health and care plans, but those at SEN support, because obviously the clinical commissioning group commissions our therapy services, child development services, our mental health services, children's community nursing, and we've already heard that the majority of children's needs will be met at that level and through our universal service provision. And we have a statutory duty again in health to notify the local authority of any child under the age of 5 who may have a special educational need. And as Mandy said, those get fed into the integrated key working service, which is another service that is jointly commissioned and jointly funded by both the CCG and the local authority. So there's a real commitment to working jointly for our this very important group of children and young people.
Thank you, Alison. Last slide, colleagues. So post 16, so all our young people grow up, they all enter into their adulthood, and it's absolutely fundamental that we have systems and processes across the whole SEND system and across the whole local area that supports our young people into their adult lives. And we have undertaken some quite significant pieces of work over recent years to move this forward. So we have really good collaborative work with the economy department in Hammersmith and Fulham, and our people and talent, HR in old speak, on our inclusive employment approach. So we have created, there is a board, we have created inclusive apprenticeships. We are working really hard on delivering the Hammersmith and Fulham supported internship, which has been open for, oh gosh, probably 6 years now. And the supported internship is the model whereby young people who have got relatively complex needs within education, health and care plans are supported supported to still be in college 1 day a week and have a rotation of work placements across a year. So it's essentially a year-long work experience, which really readies our young people to be ready to then apply for jobs. And we've been very, very successful with our supported internship model in Hammersmith and Fulham, and then progressing those young people into inclusive apprenticeships. So we've created some roles which have much more accessible eligibility to access the jobs, and supporting our young people through access to work, and again working very closely with the economy and our HR departments to deliver those models. There are actually 25 supported internship programmes available to our Hammersmith and Fulham residents across the region, and we work very closely with the West London Alliance, who coordinate those programmes, and Hammersmith and Fulham actually chairs the Regional Supported Employment Programme Board. So we are very, very strong on supported employment, and supported employment is very much championed by members of this board and by members of other PACs across the council. We've created new roles within our service, our Pathways to Independence roles. So those are practitioners that will work one-to-one with young people, supporting them to identify their pathways into employment, supporting them to access independent travel training if they need that support, supporting them to find the right courses, to find the right supported internship, and then supporting them through into their job applications. We have in Hammersmith and Fulham Q6, which is our post-19 highly specialist ASD provision, supporting our very, very complex young people to stay in Hammersmith and Fulham. Quite often for this cohort of young people, education is out of area, and we are very committed to keeping our young people in area wherever we can. We have worked very closely with the Specialist Housing Board, which was a very live board pre the COVID, the pandemic, and delivered some key deliverables during the work it did during that period. And that board is now ready to start coming back together to take things to the next level. But in that board already we have achieved the commissioning of specialist housing for our young adults who are leaving their education, moving on into their semi-independent living in the community with purpose-built housing. So that's a project called Emling Gardens. It's an adults project, but actually it is about how we in children's work with adults to ensure that there are those pathways into adult life. We work very, very closely with our adult social care day provisions to ensure that there are provisions. And again, the pandemic has been problematic for the provision of social care, as colleagues will know. But actually, that joint working is a real strength, and that joint working across planning and ensuring provision will be in place. And we've created a work stream, our commissioning for transitions, to make sure that we are really, really joining up with our colleagues across children's, adults and health to ensure that the quantum of need is understood and that commissioning strategies are in place. And then we have a specific 14 to 25 team in our EHC service. So we have practitioners who only work with that cohort so that we develop the real expertise that they need to ensure that those pathways are effectively managed. So a big piece of work preparation for adulthood, and one that we continue to strive to achieve. So that is the end of the presentation. Madam Chair, I will take that down.
Thank you. I mean, wow, thank you for that hugely comprehensive presentation. It's amazing to see what you and the team have achieved, especially given the past year. I think, it hasn't been easy for anyone, and to have all of those achievements, all of those attainment levels, everything you're doing in such a comprehensive, amazing way, it's really, really quite moving and awe-inspiring. So thank you so much, not to you, but to everyone for getting all of this done. It's truly amazing. Can I also just say as a side note how much I appreciate this format for huge bits of information. It's much easier than a long text-heavy report. So thank you for the PowerPoint format on that. I had a couple of questions which I'm going to go into before I open it out to the rest of the committee, and I can see some hands have shot up already. There was a point there about the timeline of the EHCP plans and how that the that has improved drastically since 2017. You said, understandably, there's going to be a dip in 2021 because of COVID, but do you feel kind of confident that that's going to return back to those high levels post-COVID?
Definitely it will return, but the COVID impact has been multiple. So we have to measure the timeline from the day it's received in our system to the day we issue the final plan. That timeline doesn't shift. During the period of COVID, obviously children weren't in school. Many children weren't in school, so that has had the multiple impacts on this process, apart from the multiple impacts on children themselves, of course. But the impacts on this process has been that obviously the SENCOs, so they are the officers, the specialist teachers in schools, weren't able to collate the information to put them through the system. So we've had a bit of a bulge in terms of referrals in. More importantly, the practitioners who need to go into school, particularly the educational psychologists, weren't able to go into school to do those assessments in school. So we've got a delay in gathering the advice. The service, the Education, Health and Care Planning Service, collate the information. They don't do anything other than collate and draft plans. So are reliant on the different elements of the system being able to do their bits of the work to get that through to us. And then the other element that was very, very problematic, obviously, was that you know, all health professionals at one point were diverted to the front line. So speech and language therapists, for instance, were diverted to the front line. And again, they are really key to the whole system. So everything is give or take back to normal. I think we are still yet to really fully understand the impact on children and the impact of the loss of the year of education, year and a half of education for some, the impact of that. So we are expecting perhaps increased need to come through the system, but in terms of the process and our piece in coordinating and the factors to deliver the advice coming in, we don't anticipate once we get over this bulge that we will be able to not deliver against our statutory requirements. It's really important for children and their families that they get the support in a timely way. However, we also work with schools and are able to do work at SEN support level. We have a wide range of services. Satwinder described the specialist teaching service, the educational psychology service. So we always do make sure that children's needs are met, even while they are going through the education, health and care plan process. If resources are necessary to give to schools as a short-term bridging, we will do that. So we do make sure children's needs are met and aren't disadvantaged by a delay in the issue.
That's wonderful, because that was going to be my next question about what happens in that period. So thank you for being ahead of the curve there. I mean, keeping that in mind, the attainment figures, the attendance figures over the past year are also astounding, given everything that's happened. There was the point you made about inclusivity in the Youth Council and how the past year has meant that we've been able to make really positive strides there. Was that specific? Was that kind of around being able to hold those meetings online, or is it broader than that? And are those things that we're going to be able to keep into the future?
Absolutely. I think by being able to do all of the meetings remotely, it has been far less daunting for our young people to become involved. And the Youth Council has been incredibly supportive in inviting the whole range of children and young people to be involved and adapting the way they are running their meetings to ensure that everybody is included. And we've had a significant input from our young people with additional needs. 2 of our inclusive apprenticeships are co-production inclusive apprenticeships, so we've employed them to ensure that we are delivering against that key value. So we have young adults who are employed, and it is their job to work with our mainstream youth council and our whole system to make sure that we are getting the voice of our young people fully included.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got a couple more questions, but I can see there are lots of hands that are shot up, so I'm going to hand over for a moment before we come back to me. Nandini, I can see your hand is up first, so could we have you first, please?
Hi, I do work closely with Mandy and colleagues, so forgive me for a range of questions. I do have my young person with me as well. He's terribly interested in this session.
Very good.
I was you were saying to bridge the high needs funding block, SEND support and inclusion is also one of the means that you will be bridging the high needs funding block. So how are you going to monitor SEN support? And in another part of your presentation, you had also said that the demand for EHCPs is increasing year on year by 13%. So on one hand, you're saying that SEND support will be used to bridge the block. On the other hand, you're also saying demand for EHCPs is increasing year on year. So slightly contradictory. So how are you going to balance both? How will you monitor SEN support?
So the 13% is across the 3-year period, Nandini, not 13% per year. So it's 13%, and some of that increase is about, we've only just got to, it's a bit technical, but we've only just got to the period in which young people who could extend their education up to 25 have reached 25. So the actual quantum of young people with EHCPs has just grown because people are getting older with their EHCPs. But yes, there is still an increase, and that increase is of concern to us. But it's of concern to, we are never concerned if a child has very complex special educational needs and a referral comes through, because there is definitely a cohort of children who absolutely need education, health and care plans, and we need to ensure that we are being very, very clear about how their needs are met through that statutory process. What we have found in Hammersmith and Fulham is that we have, the way we have set up our system and our services, and particularly access to speech and language therapy, has been problematic and has resulted in children having to apply, their families having to apply, their schools having to apply for an education, health and care plan in order to access speech and language therapy. And it's the way we have delivered our services. Often people will say, oh gosh, what are health doing about that? But actually this, while it's therapy, it's actually not a health responsibility. Access to speech and language therapy when children are school age is very much sitting in our gift in the local authority. So what we have done is we've identified that as one of the key areas where we haven't been effectively meeting the needs of children at SEN support, and therefore pushing people through this complex process in order to get the support that they need. So we are looking at increasing access to a targeted offer of support for children who have identified speech and language needs. Satwinder, would you like to say a little bit more about that, because that's definitely your area?
Yes, thank you, Mandy, and apologies, I did fail to introduce myself. I'm Satwinder Sara, and I'm the strategic lead for early years education and SEN transformation. So what we very clearly are aiming to do is, as Mandy's just described, is to develop a more rigorous and robust and evidence-based early intervention offer so that we can support children with both emerging needs and those who are awaiting multidisciplinary assessments with interventions that are effective. And alongside the introduction of the new teams, we are aiming to develop a framework by which we can capture the impact that these services will have. We're working very closely with our SENCOs and our educational psychologists who are attached to all our schools, and they work very closely with SENCOs in planning for individual children and groups of children. So we will very clearly try and track the impact we're having through these programs of work, as well as the support that the educational psychologists and our specialist teachers are already providing. We're introducing a couple of key new programs, which are, and I'll talk about the speech, language and communication one, because that is one that probably will have a very big impact, because at the moment what we have is a position where we very much aim to support children through a highly specialist speech therapy input. And so a lot of the children don't receive or receive a level of service around speech, language and communication, which is very much dependent on quality first teach and teachers' knowledge and expertise in the area. What we're going to do is to give them an opportunity to work with a digital program that has been developed by speech therapists themselves to support teachers in identifying which children need what level of input, whether it should be from a very highly specialist person or whether it could be a school-based intervention. and that does come with a robust monitoring and tracking framework. So we will be able to monitor those children over a course of an academic year to really assess the impact and improvement that those children have made as a result of the input that they've received from the intervention.
Thank you, Sarwinda.
Chair, can I ask one more question? I have lots of questions, but in the interest of time and other people, I won't ask more than just one more question. Can I ask?
Nandini, please feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Again, admissions, you were saying 49% out of 49% in special schools out of borough and 29% in mainstream schools within borough. I don't remember the data now. So is Hammersmith and Fulham children compromised in any way? Are they getting priority for admissions? Are they compromised by other students taking up place, especially in special schools?
So that's a really tricky one, Nandini. We are fortunate to have 4 special schools and then a number of specialist units linked to our special schools. So that's really fortunate, and lots of local authorities don't have enough special schools, so we are very fortunate. And actually we have more special school places than we would ever need for our own resident population. But by having 4 schools covering the range, so we have Queen's Malese as our very expert school for children with autism. We have Jack Tizard for our school, is our school for children with very complex disabilities, severe learning disabilities, profound and multiple disabilities. We have Wood Lane, which is our school for children who have some mental health needs sometimes, children who have speech and language needs, children who have brain's gone, sorry, specific learning difficulties. So it's all, you know, it's quite a mainstream cohort at Wood Lane, but children who would not usually cope very well in mainstream schools. So that's an unusual school for us to have, actually. And then we have Cambridge, which works very much with children who've got moderate learning disabilities, autism, and present with some social emotional mental health needs. So we have a good range of provision, and more provision than we ever would need for Hammersmith and Fulham. And without having that range, we would have a problem. I think the reality is that our schools are also very sought after by other boroughs, and the system does not allow us to ring fence those places for children. The legal system doesn't. However, what we are able to do, because we work so closely with our special schools, and because we are so good at managing our cycle of understanding the needs of our children, is that we are able to identify which children very early on are likely to need a special school placement, so that we can ensure that we get our applications in early. But we're not allowed to ring fence. The legal system doesn't allow us to do that.
Thank you. I think I'll pass on, and then if I can come back if because I'm sure others are waiting to ask questions as well. I'll pass on, but I'll like to come back if possible.
Of course, thank you, Nandini. Councillor Loveday.
Yes, I'm at the beginning of last year, just before lockdown, the high needs block had a structural overspend. I think we were running at about £6 million a year, and this service accounts for about something like 1/6 of the high needs block, I think. Isn't that right? About 1/5. Something like that, 1/5 or 1/6 of the. How's that been going? I'm obviously they identified a lot of savings. How have you been dealing with those savings over the last year?
So
or have they simply suspended them because of because of COVID?
No, quite the opposite, actually. So all of the work that we've described in terms of our transformation is the work that we are doing to ensure that every penny we spend across our special educational needs system is spent in the right place, making sure that we are identifying children early, delivering services early to prevent the need for escalating up through the more expensive parts of the system. We are doing huge amounts of work in relation to what we call our SE insufficiency. So although I said we have plenty of provision in our special schools, we've identified that actually we have limited provision in what we would call additionally resourced units. So units in mainstream schools allowing children to be in mainstream, but have additional support to support them. So again, because we've got that gap, children are pushed up through into our special schools, which by nature are more expensive to deliver. So we have children in our special school system who could be in a mainstream school if we reorganise the resources. So a huge amount of work we are doing to make sure that we organise those resources effectively, so that we meet children's needs, and that's always our primary driver, and we achieve good outcomes for children, but we're effective with the money. And over the last oh gosh, I can't remember the timescale now, 6 months or so, we've been working with the DfE, who have been working with us to address our plans, and we have been issued with what the DfE are calling a safety valve. So we have shared those plans with the DfE. They have approved those plans. They have allowed us to invest some money, and they have made an agreement with us that the DfE, through this agreement, the safety valve as their terminology, will offset some of that deficit, such that in 4 years' time that deficit will hopefully have worked its way through the system. They are essentially increasing our allocation of money to pay off the overdraft, essentially, over the 4 years, so long as we stick to the agreements that we have made.
I appreciate there was the extra money from central government, but in terms of these of transferring children, finding more places in mainstream school for children who are at the moment are either in special schools or would be normally pointed in the direction of a special school, what sort of numbers are we talking about at the moment? I mean, how many have been transferred or reallocated, and or how many are we planning to do now?
So we don't have very specific figures that I can share with you today, but we can share our projections, and it is only ever projections because we can only look at what we know we have now and what we've had in terms of the last 3 years. But we are working with our mainstream schools. We have some very discrete projects at the moment looking at whole school groupings, so that we look at the funding into whole school groupings to ensure that the school has enough resource and enhanced level to meet those children. We're piloting those, and then we're working through, and it's early days of this programme. So it's early days of the programme in relation to what that will look like. We're working with our schools to see which schools are the most suitable schools to create these enhanced offers, and whether or not we actually need to create some bespoke units. So those are separate classrooms, taking over empty classrooms if we have them, thinking about how we're actually going to build a resource around children in those schools. So it is very early days, and I can see that Tony has put his hand up, Chair, and I think Tony may well be able to answer some of the technical elements of this question better than I.
Of course, yeah, please.
If you could, please, Tony, because I'm interested to know.
Yeah, no problem, Councillor Loveday. So you mentioned that sort of a year to 18 months ago we had a 6 million in-year deficit, and that's
about half of that's been filled, hasn't it, with government?
Yeah. So in the financial year that's just ended, that has reduced to an outturn of about 2.9 million overspend, albeit that's before the receipt of safety valve funding, 6 million in year, which obviously produces a net underspend and to effectively reduce the retained deficit on the high needs block. In terms of the move that we've just the financial year that we've just moved into, 21-22, we are forecasting just over £500,000 overspend, which has been agreed with the Department of Education within the safety valve plan to allow us, as Mandy has described, to the local authority to invest in services in the short term, short to medium term rather, and that is to ensure that the local authority is able to, as Mandy has described, meet need at the right point in time and in the most cost effective way possible in terms of meeting need as it presents, and really, as Mandy has described, ensuring that we get the best value for the high needs block funding that we receive. So very much over the last 18 months to 2 years, and as part of the work we've done with the Department of Education, we've been on a trajectory towards a balanced in-year position, which is sort of targeted over the medium term, which will, with significant investment into services, will enable a sustainable high needs block allocation in the longer term. So
you see, I think, oh gosh, I think I've frozen here. Oh no, that's right. I think this committee would be really very interested to know the scale of the reallocation, if I can put it that way, of children from special schools to mainstream schools, because obviously you get to a certain point where certain special schools may not be sustainable. So I'd be interested to know how many children are involved in the pilot at the moment, and roughly as a proportion of children at the moment who are in special schools, you are thinking would be a realistic number to reallocate to mainstream.
I'm going to let Mandy answer that question.
Whoever wants to answer it, they can. I just want to know.
Perfect, Mandy.
So we will have to come back to you with the actual figures in terms of those projections. However, we are not in any way thinking that those special schools then become unsustainable. Each of our special schools are swamped with referrals every year. So those referrals, they're called consultations, have to come through the local authority, and then we have to pass them on. So we see exactly how many children and how many cases that the schools are saying no to because they just don't have the space for them. So you could fill 2 of our special schools certainly twice over with the amount of demand for special school places. And we in Hammersmith and Fulham were well ahead of the game in developing our special school provision. Other local areas are now building special schools because there just aren't enough special schools, and people travel very long way. So we have children in Hammersmith and Fulham who travel from Sutton to come to Hammersmith and Fulham, and I know that's a long way because that's where I live. It's a very long journey for those children to come into school every day. So we have absolutely no concern that we are going to deliver our special schools to be unsustainable. The issue for us is about making sure that our children are in the right provision where they can get the right access to curriculum, to support, to have the right friendship groups, to have the right pathway at the next stages of their education. And actually that's a real driver for us, is making sure that we and to be inclusive, that our children are included in mainstream wherever they can. But we absolutely know that we need special schools as well, and we will always want to be using our special schools for those children that need them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Andy. Matthew.
Hi guys. In many respects, actually, the questions I had have kind of been addressed, so I have to reword it now. But obviously, again, it is around sort of funding, because obviously there's some fantastic detail in here, and it's wonderful everything that's been going on and the incredibly hard work that everyone's doing on this. I presume, and if so, is the funding in place obviously to support that, and what can be done if not, in order to try to make that in order to get the funding?
So the funding is driven by a formula, and I may bring Tony in a minute to explain that a little bit more, but the funding is allocated in line with our population, our local population, and there are various factors that drive the formula. One of our challenges in Hammersmith and Fulham has been that historically the way the system, the DFE, the Education Schools Funding Authority, that they allocated, the formula didn't work for Hammersmith because it was very much balanced on historic spend. Because we were actually very frugal and managed our money very well historically, we were disadvantaged by the formula. As we move forward, they are changing the way that formula is balanced, and we anticipate being in a better place. Tony, you probably can technically answer that better than I can.
Yes, thanks, Mandy, and apologies when I spoke before. I didn't introduce myself properly. I'm Tony Burton. I'm the head of finance for Children's Services and Education. So yes, what Mandy's saying is effectively right. The funding for high needs with all of education comes through the dedicated schools grant, and the high needs is allocated to local authorities on the basis of an extremely complex national funding formula. As Mandy has said, we have benefited in the last two financial years, in increases in funding, as actually have many local authorities nationally. The changes in the national funding formula are slightly beneficial to Hammersmith and Fulham comparatively, I think. But obviously the gains within the national funding formula are capped. So we do expect to see, as we have done for 21-22, the current financial year and the next financial year, we do expect to see increases in funding on the high needs block. And obviously at the present time, the Department of Education haven't got their funding settlement from Treasury for the 22-23 financial year, but our understanding from the Department of Education is that this is a priority area for them, and so we, as part of the safety valve planning that we have worked on in terms of the annual funding allocation, we do expect to see some funding over the medium to longer term, and obviously that funding within the national funding formula also comes hand in hand with the safety valve funding, which is the additional funding over the medium term to address the retained deficit on the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant. So sorry, that was a rather summary overview of the funding position, but in conclusion, it has been looking quite positive. And we have indications that the funding will continue to increase nationally, albeit that's subject to confirmation, subject to the government spending review.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. Matt, did you have another question?
Can I ask a really, really brief follow-up question? It's literally one word. In relation to that funding, then, so obviously it's come through the designated school grant, but you said it's related to the population. Is it the population of Hammersmith and Fulham, or is it related to the population of students with EHCPs in schools?
I can share some of the detail of the funding formula perhaps outside of the meeting, but yes, it's based on proxy factors. So there are sort of proxy factors that the national funding formula use based on Hammersmith and Fulham data and other local authority data that drives the allocation to the funding area. And in relation to Nandini's question earlier about places in schools, if a Hammersmith and Fulham special school place has a non-resident pupil placed in that place, the national funding formula now adjusts the funding to ensure that that funding is fully funded from within the national funding formula. So very complex. Many proxy factors used to determine the funding allocation at local authority level.
Thank you, Tony. Matt, do you have another question? I know Nandini had another question. Her hand's just popped back up. So I'll hand over to her.
I'm not sure what it does.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah, Nandini, do you want to come in?
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to ask a final question on transitions. I mean, you have wonderful programs in place, but we do know that transitions is an area of difficulty for young people and their families. So I was just wondering, do you have any data on destinations? Like, do you have any data on where young people are headed? You've also mentioned supported internships. Do you know how many Hammersmith and Fulham young people are actually on the supported employment programs? And again, in terms of housing, do you have an element of co-production, and how many are in line for housing? So do you have data on those kinds of destinations?
So we have some of that data, Nandini, but not all of it. So we can definitely say how many Hammersmith and Fulham residents are on this year's supported internship. We can say how many we think are going to go on next year's. I say think because until we get to September and young people really decide what they want to do, we don't know. So from September, but we can also go back and say how many have been on the programmes over the years. In terms of destinations, we know those that have been on supported internships that we stay in touch with. We have no statutory structural mechanism to stay in touch with young people, so we only stay in touch with them if they're also involved with on our social care pathways, or if they've chosen to stay in touch with us, or indeed if they're working for us, because many of our graduates for our internship programs have picked up the inclusive apprenticeship roles. So we don't have a mechanism beyond their year that they finish. The partnership for the supported internships is the local authority who hold the education, health and care plan, the local authority who in our internship are providing the work roles, but of course some of our young people may go on to internships that are hosted by many of our neighbours, so we know a little bit less about their destinations if they're further afield. And then the other element of the partnership is Action on Disability. So Action on Disability are funded through a grant to provide the post-internship support, and they become part of our local offer in terms of supporting young people beyond the work that we are responsible for in our education, health and care service. So we can gather what we can for you, Nandini, but we have no mechanism once they leave our area. Hello, Arv, nice to see you. But we can gather what we can. And there was a third part of that question. Oh, housing. So housing, most of our young people who have special educational needs who are supported into housing are supported through our colleagues in social care, adult social care, and will be supported with a support package to live in housing in a semi-independent way. And we could possibly gather that information. We would need to speak to our colleagues in social care.
I just want to remark that transition continues to be an area of concern, and it is quite problematic still. But I do acknowledge that you're taking great steps to sort of make things better. I was slightly concerned with Councillor Loveday's question on moving from children from special schools to mainstream, and I'm very thankful that you answered that. So thank you.
We're not going to move anybody, Nandini, but the arrangement that we have is that we don't have an inclusive offer in our mainstreams that gives that enhanced provision. So actually it's the other way around. We find ourselves sometimes with children needing to be in special school who wouldn't otherwise need to be in special school. It's about giving people choice, and a fundamental element of the Children and Families Act and our statutory duties is parental choice comes first. If a parent of a child with exceptionally complex needs wanted their child to be educated in mainstream, we and the schools have a statutory duty to do everything possible to make that happen. Equally, if a parent wants their child to be in a specialist provision, so long as the evidence doesn't indicate that it's contrary to the delivery of their education, then we would be likely to support that decision. So it is about broadening the choice, not us lifting and shifting, but it's about making sure we have the full range of provision to meet children's needs. Many parents want their children to be educated in mainstream provision alongside their brothers and sisters in their local communities, and actually we need to do more just to develop that offer further.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matt, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand?
Legacy, sorry.
That's fine. Eleanor, have you got a question?
Yes. I think you can speak up. Yes. Yes.
Eleanor, I think you might be muted now. Okay, lovely. You've just become unmuted. So do you want to repeat that question, Eleanor?
The positive behaviour support service is jointly funded. by H&F and CCG. Could you explain that, please?
Yes, I can. So we have a new service. We describe it as a positive behaviour support service. It's a service that works with children with complex learning disabilities, complex autism, who present with behaviours that place themselves at harm at times, place their families, their carers, their siblings. It's a cohort of children who require very specialist support to enable them to keep safe, but also to enable them to have the best opportunities in life. Children who are presenting with very complex behaviour often find themselves being restricted in terms of their opportunities. They may not be able to go on social activities. They may not be able to do something as simple as go to the park, go out with their family in the evenings, the weekends. The impact of behaviour can be very restrictive on their life outcomes. So we have jointly commissioned with the CCG a positive behaviour support service. So it is an intensive.
What is the CCG?
The CCG, oh, apologies. The CCG is the clinical commissioning group. So it is the commissioning element of health. They commission on behalf of the GPs, kind of, but also channel money through that comes through from the NHS England, the health money that comes into the authority. So they are the key health commissioner in the area. So they have worked with us in the local authority to develop this new service. Positive behaviour support is the methodology, and it's a very recognised methodology for working with children and young people who've got challenging behaviour as a result of their autism and learning disability. So the service is hosted by Hammersmith and Fulham CAMS and is totally linked in with Hammersmith and Fulham CAMS, but also works across our children's social care with our disabled children's social work team, our children's home, our specialist children's home in Hammersmith and Fulham, and our short break service, so that we identify children as early as possible whose behaviours are of concern, and a clinician, a psychologist, a specialist psychologist will work with the family, will work with the system to ensure that the behaviour is understood. Quite often behaviour is linked to communication. Many of our children with complex needs don't have verbal communication, have different forms of communication. The behaviour itself is a communication. So supporting everybody to understand the behaviour and to identify mechanisms to reduce the behaviour, to enable young people to have their needs met through different means that is safer for them, thus improving their outcomes. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, any more questions on this section? Lovely. Okay, well, Mandy, Satwinder, Tony, Alison, thank you so much for that. And I think I've got as notes there, so sending to Nandini and everyone else the number of those in the different post-16 routes, the destinations and housing, and then Tony, the funding formula details as well. If those could be shared, that would be lovely. Thank you very much. All right, item 7, Summer in the City, the Big Learning Tent, our vision for the H&F Summer Programme. Can I ask Jan to present this item, please?
Councillor, if you'd allow, I'm going to present on behalf of Jan this evening, myself and Amy, Lala, who's here. So if that's all right, I'll introduce the item and then pass over to Amy.
That's absolutely fine. Will you both introduce yourselves when you start off?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
My name's Leslie Bell. I work as strategic lead in the children's commissioning team, and I'm here to introduce. Let me pull up the slides. Second. So I'm here to introduce the Summit in the City programme. Go. Oh, sorry, 1 second, I had some technical issues. Can people see that? That's loading, it's thinking.
I can't see it yet, but that's fine. I'm sure it will. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. Thinking about it.
Well,
so
dark in a low moment.
Sorry, can no one see that?
No, there we go.
Oh,
no,
brilliant.
it's come up.
Sorry about that. So I'm here to introduce the Summit in the City programme, which this year's theme is the Big Learning Tent. On an annual basis, Hammersmith and Fulham host the Summer in the City programme, which runs across the summer school holidays. This year, we've been able to receive some grants, the holiday and activities grant from central government. So what we've done is brought that together with our offer and made that into an even bigger programme that we're really excited about. And it's really focused this year around being inclusive, around education, and around food. What we've done is we've partnered with Let Me Play, and I'm going to introduce Amy from Let Me Play in a second. And they're a partner that we've worked with who've delivered a lot of our fantastic summer provision over the summer. And you might have heard of them before because they were really instrumental in delivering support over the COVID period. So over COVID, where Amy and her team at Let Me Play were fantastic in working with our schools to deliver key worker care, to deliver care for our vulnerable children, but in a much, we were really proud of that offer over the summer. So what we've done is Amy's worked with us to put together this fantastic summer programme, including the grants money, top-up money from the government. So Amy, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And yes, my name's Amy Lala and I'm from Let Me Play, and we're delivering on behalf of LMP Action this fantastic programme. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm really pleased to be with you this evening to tell you about this really exciting programme. I feel that it is something really special that we're able to deliver in Hammersmith and Fulham, especially given the context of what everyone has been through. The programme is very much an inclusive programme, and actually we'll be delivering it for not only school-aged children but also young people that might have an additional need, as we've heard about, up until the age of 25. The programme's going to run between every day in the summer, every weekday, so that's from 23rd of July through to the 31st of August. And the really special thing this summer, and we know it's so important for families and for young people, is that all of the activity providers will be providing a nutritious meal. And we think that's so important, especially for families that have experienced food insecurity during this period. It's been a pleasure to be working with the council to really maximise all of the provision that the council has, and very much building on a foundation of support of different providers that have been delivering over the last few years. So it's a real culmination of provision. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the activities that we did in our first round of when we started to look at all of the provision across the borough. And what we can see is that we've got a list of all the areas of deprivation, and then we've overlaid this with information about the parks, and then all of the provision that activity providers can actually deliver. We found that really useful to have this as a visual, and we've also been working with updating it now, and we'll be seeing this in our brochure so that families can really see and pinpoint where activities are going to be taking place this summer. We've got a range of different providers, and we'll be going into some detail with that. But this summer, activity providers are going to be able to experience lots of different provision, including sports, arts and crafts. There's going to be educational activities, which we think is really important, but then also lots of enriching activities. We've got some flagship events. So these are going to be kicking off the summer, especially with our picnic in the park. This is going to be a range of different providers providing just taster activities so that we can really launch the summer and make sure that we're getting off to a really good start. But excitingly, we're going to have music events happening in the glass houses in Ravenscourt Park. And also the Nourish Hub are going to be providing a central venue really for activities, food provision for families and young people to really take part in that learning piece with food and nutrition. And we've got some real key priorities that we've tried to meet, and we've really tried to align these to the borough and what's really important. So some of the activities you'll see will absolutely have a STEM focus. They'll all be enriching, and they'll all be what we hope to be really, really vibrant for our families. There's going to be nutrition that's going to be embedded into activities, but then we've also got loads of resources that we're going to be passing over to families as well. We've got signposting information readily available, and we're going to make sure that activity providers are reaching that kind of minimum threshold for physical activity. So we want to keep our young people active this summer because we think that's a really healthy thing to be able to do. We've tried to link in also with providing kind of peers to be on programmes and providing work experience. We actually tested this out during our Easter provision, and it worked really well, and it was a really positive addition to the programme. So we think that would be great to include again in the summer. And this is just some information about how the grant is going to be distributed. So it was a really thorough process, we think, that we went through. And when we launched with a pre-invite to find out expressions of interest for people that might be interested in taking part in this summer. The turnaround time has been really quick, but we're really so pleased that we've got 25 local organisations that have submitted grant bids. So you can see the breakdown there of how the funding's being distributed. I think one of the real positives that we've seen within the borough is just really building on the activities that already exist to make sure that we're utilising the funding to take it even further than the kind of grant allows. So that's really positive. Some examples of that have been extending the provision to being 5 days a week instead of 4, extending the hours of provision as well, and making sure that we've really got that variety in our provision as well. And here's just a snapshot of some of the organisations that have submitted a bid. So as you can see from there, we've got theatre projects, we've got youth clubs, we've got our specialist services, and we've got some activities that will be on the water. So we're hoping for good weather, which will make those really more enjoyable. And next steps. So actually we've kind of surpassed some of these dates, but we've finalised the grant process, and actually grant agreements have gone out and are going out as we kind of speak. The summer programme is all confirmed. We're hoping to have the brochure ready any day now, and likewise with the website. So information has been passed across, and we're hoping to get this all out to kind of our families and to the communities as soon as possible. We're doing training with all providers, just making sure that we're meeting all of the requirements of the grant, but then also making sure that we're talking about best practice. And we do know that we're delivering in a sensitive time, but we also know that so many young people have been displaced and really need support and are quite vulnerable during this period. So our inclusive programme, we hope, will address that, and we hope that obviously the food provision as well will support their kind of well-being. We'll be outlining some opportunities for volunteers to get involved, and then we'll be leading a big communication campaign. So looking at our brochure, our website, support from young people who'll be sharing the information, and also from providers who are doing some fantastic work in the community already, and are really gearing up to what will be, we hope, a really excellent summer. We're going to start to explore the opportunities for sustainability in future years. I think the foundation of what Hammersmith and Fulham has provided over the years has been fantastic, and this is just really exciting to be in this position where we have so many activities and so many places available for young people to take part in these activities. So next, I think you'll see hopefully a website that will be sent out to you, and brochures and online information, and we certainly hope that you'll be able to share this amongst the people that you speak to and work with.
Thanks, Amy. Councillor, I think Chair, I'll hand back to you for any questions.
Lovely, thank you, Amy and Leslie. Brilliant. I mean, again, another amazing comprehensive list of provisional activity over the summer. Thank you so much for the time in putting this together. I guess the first and perhaps most obvious question is, what impact is COVID going to have on this programme with the Delta variant, and what are the plans in place to mitigate whatever happens next? I appreciate that's a slightly impossible question to answer because you don't have a crystal ball to look at next steps of COVID, but I'm sure it's been part of the planning.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of at the forefront of our mind with everything. So we are making sure that we have contingency plans in place. We're making sure that firstly, when we're speaking to all of the providers, they've got their COVID kind of safety plans in place. They're doing their risk assessments. But likewise, as a coordinator, we're making sure we're passing on the information about best practice. In terms of contingencies, there's a layered approach. So depending on restrictions and whether we fall into new restrictions would be how we kind of scale back or change the programme. So an example of that might be if we're scaling back in terms of looking at the numbers available on each provision, and then also if we have to fully scale back, I think there's a backup plan of having activity provision cards and food available to be sent home. So yes, it's on our mind, and we're just making sure that we have those backup plans so that we're able to really move quickly if we need to. We do want to make sure that as far as possible we can go ahead, but we understand that it absolutely has to be safe to do so.
And I think it's worth adding as well, we've been through our pretty rigorous corporate process with this as well. So making sure that we've been through that process, but as well we have had approved 5 weeks of school meals vouchers for the summer as well. So in addition to this programme, we're also going to ensure that our children eligible for free school meals will get the food vouchers for 5 weeks over summer.
Brilliant. That was also going to be my next question. Lovely, thank you. Moving on to a slightly different topic, how will this be marketed?
Yes, so it will be marketed through the website. We also have an online brochure that is going to be up and running. Our providers are going to be sharing it amongst their network, but we also think it's so important to get all of this information out to schools. So as soon as everything is ready, that will go out to schools. And I think also there's quite a lot of national coverage as well. So we hope to make sure that we're available and visible on social media to ensure that families can see where we are. But we've got the communication support from the council, and I believe that's going to go out in newsletters as well.
We've also done a lot of promoting. So, for example, with our everyone from our social workers to our early help service to, Jan Parnell, our Director of Education, has been promoting it through her school network meetings. So we've actually taken this presentation to a lot of places as well to kind of promote that. We've also utilised the Youth Council, who are actually helping around the design and communication for that as well. So we're going out to young people directly to support with that, so that we're making sure that we're communicating through ways that they'd want.
Brilliant, thank you. I was going to say, I can see there are some events in my ward. I'm sure council would be really, really happy to promote things that are happening in their wards if you wanted to send that round and send the map round as well.
Oh, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Matt, I can see your hand is up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah. I was actually going to ask about marketing, but that's been stolen, so I'll take a different one. First of all, just to say that it looks amazing, and it's exactly what I think young people need really, at the moment. After the last year, 18 months, whatever it's been, this is exactly what they need. And from a teaching perspective, this is something that's obviously something we're not so able to offer in schools, because we're focusing quite a lot on the catch-up curriculum. But this is exactly what they need. The question I suppose I have then would be, what requirements do you put in place then to ensure that the providers are adequately sort of are aware of their safeguarding responsibilities for students during this time, because obviously, or for young people during this time, because obviously there is potential that they will come out with information. Will that other providers are aware of how to share that information if it comes up?
So our commission providers, we've got very rigorous, and through our community grants and through our commission providers, we've got a very rigorous process with that, and we've been working with those providers for a long time. In terms of the grant process, Amy, do you want to touch upon the grant process and how you ensure the safeguarding of and the quality of the delivery for the providers?
Yes, and thank you very much for the question, because it is so important. And what we know is that very often when young people are in relaxed environments, there are kind of safeguarding concerns that do come out. So just to make sure that we're mitigating against missing anything, all providers have to go through face-to-face training, and that includes what to do if they have a safeguarding concern. We want to make sure that they follow their own procedures, but we also have like a catch-all. So we're asking providers to make sure that they're communicating that to us as the coordinator, and then we have a responsibility to share that with the council. We're making sure that we're getting details of all providers and who their designated safeguarding lead is, and everyone will have a face-to-face site visit from a member of our team, just to make sure that as the summer kind of goes on, they're not forgetting what the responsibilities are, and they are making sure that they're picking up on those safeguarding concerns.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Eleanor, is that a legacy hand, or have you got a question on the section?
I was just wondering about an official opening. You're going to have somebody to open it, like Marcus Rashford or something.
Oh, yeah, so that would be lovely, and I would really welcome him if he's available. But actually, it's a really good question, because he's actually done some great social media for the programme that we're able to share. So we're actually using that in some of the training that we have with our providers, because he's one person that's really kind of brought to light the issue around food insecurity. And what's really nice is that where you have someone that is such a role model to many, is that we really do kind of share that and understand that actually this is our common denominator, that we understand our families and our young people really do need these meals and really do need this activity. So we'll use him on video for now, but yeah, we'll give him a shout out if he's available. That would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think there might be a queue to go and meet him if he ever did turn up. Thank you. Any other questions on this section? No, it doesn't look like it. Lovely. I mean, thank you so much again for all of your work on this. Oh, Larry, sorry, Councillor Culhane, would you like to come in?
Hi, sorry, Chair, if I may be so cheeky, I actually just wanted to pay tribute to Amy and all of the other organisations who are taking part in this programme in the summer. And we've spoken about it at this PAC before, but actually some of the best friends of schools throughout the pandemic have been Amy and her team, sort of leading the charge and getting the third sector to really wrap around and support our schools. The committee will remember that actually the overwhelming majority of our schools stayed open throughout the pandemic, even during the various lockdowns, to allow key workers to remain on the front line and to ensure that the most vulnerable children remained in education. And that was only able to happen not just because of the tenacity and flexibility of our schools, who have been fantastic, but also thanks to Let Me Play and Amy, all of the other third sector organisations, a lot of whom are listed and taking part this summer in wrapping around and supporting our schools and allowing them to do that. So I'm sure I speak for everyone when I just wanted to say, thank you for everything. Obviously, you're all going to be doing in the summer, but thank you for everything you've done for young people in the borough over the past 18 months.
Well, thank you very much. It means a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I was just going to say, just to echo what Matt said, it all sounds amazing and could not be more timely after such a difficult year. Jan, I saw your hand flicker up and then flicker back down. Would you like to come up, or am I just coming in, or am I just putting you on the spot?
No, you're not putting me on the spot. I think the point to make is this builds on last year. In the summer, Hammersmith and Fulham reached out to 4,000 families in collaboration with Amy and Let Me Play. And that was before we received central government funding. So 4,000 families last summer were impacted by a programme. This year, when we've received additional funding, which we're grateful for, we're expecting to reach out right across the borough, as you've seen. So just to point that out, I think Hammersmith and Fulham has worked incredibly well with all our voluntary partners and with Amy. So yes, just wanted to add that, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Amy. Lovely. All right, well, thank you so much for that section. Okay, I'm going to move on to item 8, childcare sufficiency assessment highlights. So could I ask Jan to come in and introduce this item? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So this is a statutory responsibility. We need to do this statutory assessment of childcare sufficiency. But this year we actually put renewed effort in terms of building on our partnerships and building on our research. And what we found that despite COVID, which did impact on our PVIs, we actually do have sufficiency in terms of childcare. So I'd like to reintroduce Satwinder, please, and also Phil Tomset, Head of Early Years, to present the key findings from this sufficiency report.
Absolutely. Welcome back, Phil.
Hello there. My name's Phil Tomset. I'm the Head of Early Years and I work in the Early Years team within the education team in Children's Services. And I'm going to just share a presentation. So the childcare sufficiency assessment is an assessment that's carried out on an annual basis, and it's a requirement for local authorities to report on the sufficiency within its borough on an annual basis. The data is drawn from a range of sources, and that's why we collate it in a ward level basis. The assessment is a snapshot in time, and it's important to note that this assessment took place in January of this year, and we collated a lot of data for the end of 2020, when obviously there was a lot of worry and concern around childcare and the provision of childcare. So the childcare sufficiency assessment is based on a particularly difficult time, and the figures that we are reporting on reflect that. So the sector was heavily impacted by COVID. A lot of parents chose not to take up their free entitlements, and also parents who did pay for childcare decided not to have their children in the places that they had agreed with providers. So providers did have a real financial burden placed on them, and really struggled to stay afloat. However, having said that, in Hammersmith and Fulham, the childcare sufficiency assessment highlighted that we had 4,387 Ofsted registered places, of which approximately 3,503 were currently active, so they were being taken up by children. When you consider what we have over 11,000 children under 5 in the borough, This means that we have 31 places available for every 100 children in Hammersmith and Fulham. And if you take our maintained provision into account, that figure rises to 44 per 100 children. So with those figures in mind, there is sufficient childcare, as Jan mentioned, and this is in line or slightly higher than the London average. We also need to point out that there were significant vacancies when we did our assessment, and this further suggests that there are sufficient places in most areas. So, recommendations and next steps. So, as we are aware that we have sufficient places, there were some areas that the assessment highlighted, which I'd like to just go through with you now. So we still have a need to ensure that families are able to access affordable childcare for their children. And we are currently renewing our promotion of these funded places across the borough, working with our local partners to promote the entitlements. So that's through our providers, our maintained nursery schools, our childminders, our children's centres, and then beyond, so where families may access other services like libraries, doctors, health visitors and midwives also. We are also trying to look at the way families apply for our entitlements and trying to reduce the paperwork where possible. We want to look at our online application process as well and try and make that more parent friendly. We're also monitoring our wraparound care. During COVID, we had a few reports that schools were focusing in on their core hours and that there was an impact on wraparound care, not just in schools, but also in our private nurseries also. However, since January 2021, there have been no further decline in wraparound care. So we are aware that this was probably an impact due to COVID, and that wraparound is now improving now that schools are getting back to normal, and the numbers of children who are attending are back to the usual numbers. Also, we're trying to ensure we retain a vibrant childcare offer. We're aware that the impact of COVID has had a significant impact on what parents are now looking for. With lots of parents working from home, for example, they may need a different type of childcare offer. So we're working with our providers across the borough to look at their business models and try and promote a more sustainable offer that reflects parents' needs. We're also working with our maintained nursery schools, all of which are Ofsted's outstanding provision, to provide a cluster support model to draw in our private nurseries and childminders, to work with them to develop their practice further, look at their business models also, and because of the amazing practice that our maintained nursery schools offer, we would like them to be at the heart of the expertise that we'd like to share with our private nurseries. We are also going to focus on individual wards. The assessment highlighted that although 13 of our wards have sufficient childcare, there are 3 wards in particular where the childcare sufficiency is lower, and that we would like to work with the providers in these areas to develop their business models and maybe promote more affordable and flexible childcare if that is possible. So we will be working with those settings more closely. We also want to improve the support for families. Family Information Service has now transferred back into Children's Services, and due to it moving back, we're now able to draw closer links with the local offer, the Children's Centre Services, the SEND teams, early help and health services, and we're able to therefore provide a more holistic approach to the information that we're providing on our Family Information Service website. The website is also being looked at to try and improve the parent journey as the parent accesses information. We're aware at the moment that parents have to do a lot of clicking to get to the right page that they're looking for. So we're working with our colleagues in digital services to review the Family Information Service platform and make it more parent friendly. And then finally, we are monitoring the longer term impact of COVID on childcare. So I've touched on a few items where we've seen more short term impact, but we're going to continue to monitor the long term impact COVID has had on the sector. And we're doing that through a variety of ways. We identified in our assessment that the majority of settings feel confident that they will be financially sustainable in 2 years' time. However, there are a proportion of settings that are quite anxious and are waiting for the restrictions to further lift to see how parents respond to the take-up of childcare. The early years team have provided ongoing support for our providers throughout the pandemic, and we will continue to offer that. This is a service that offers our providers weekly updates on local and national matters to do with the pandemic and the restrictions and how they should respond to those. We've also provided support around risk assessments, reviewing risk assessments, and if they have a reported case within their setting, then we're there to support them through that process. And finally, the service have secured partnership working with a business support sector provider that we're linking our providers with to provide advice and guidance on how best to manage through this difficult process going throughout the academic year of 2021-2022. And I'm now going to pass on to my colleague, Satwinder.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. So to continue, in light of the childcare sufficiency report, we continue to work on our early years strategy. In addition to the provider survey, we also conducted an independently led survey with our providers and our parents to further inform our priority areas. What we've learned is through the surveys and through the work that we've done with the Early Foundation Trust is that we need to prioritise 5 key areas which are reflected in our revised early years strategy, which we will hope to go out to consultation on in the summer. The key areas, some of which have already been described by Phil, but the others are very much focused on, and it picks some of the work that we described in the SEND piece: early assessment, early identification and early support for all our providers, settings and young people and families. We continue to monitor and ensure that we provide high quality childcare, which Phil has already gone into some detail on. One of our key areas of focus is ensuring that we work with our early year settings to ensure children are ready to learn and ready for transitioning into school. And we've got a range of programmes that we're working on to support our early year settings to do that. Phil's already described some of our work around our 2-year entitlement and our free early years entitlement, and some of the work we're doing around promoting that, simplifying processes and communicating that more widely. And we are working to look at how we can join up our family information service to ensure that it connects with some of our other digital platforms, such as the local offer, our schools platform. So we're having a bit of a deep dive into looking at how we can improve our promotion around that area. There are some of the actions. Phil, can we move on to the next slide? The strategy is, this is by no means reflective of all the work streams, but these are some of the highlights in the key areas that we've already started progressing on. We have our Inspire service have started to pilot, for example, a transition passport for children who are vulnerable or who have a diagnosis of ASD, or those who may be waiting for a diagnosis. We're ensuring that we've created some creative passports which will enable children to transition into reception classes and nursery with support and information that's been gathered from the early years. There's opportunities at the moment we're exploring with our outstanding maintained nurseries to provide training for our PVIs. We're looking to create 2 training hubs, one in the north, one in the south. And we are developing a range of training which has been agreed with our early year settings around a whole range of areas, and those include special educational needs and children with additional needs. One of the areas that we're very excited about is launching an early years partnership board. One of the things that we've picked up through our workshops and our surveys is our opportunity to strengthen our working with our health colleagues, particularly the health visiting services, midwives, maternity and pre and postnatal services. And that is, we're looking for a good range of representation, which will include early year providers, head teachers, parents and our health providers. In terms of our high quality offer, I won't spend too long on that. I think that's been very much covered by Phil. But one of the areas that we will continue to do is monitor the resiliency of our early years economy. We will also complete our statutory survey and our childcare sufficiency survey, and complete a quality audit to ensure that our early years sector remains good and outstanding. We will monitor very closely and have a new strategy to ensure that we increase our take up of the 2-year, which I think again Phil has described, but we've very much looked at where some of the challenges have been, what have been some of the barriers and how do we overcome those. And that has been a very interesting piece of work, and it's enabled us to improve our approach to increasing the take up of our 2-year places. Our children's centres, we've been working very closely with our early year services to reopen and provide our children's centre interventions and opening, plan to open in a COVID safe way next month. And we're just finalising those plans in terms of the activities in the universal offer for families. FIS, I think I've already mentioned, we're looking at how we can increase the digital platform with our other forms of communication, be that via the local offer and our Hammersmith and Fulham website. But we really are looking at what are other means other than our digital offer for getting our publication out to our families. So looking at pamphlets, publications, school-based information, etc. We've already delivered some training for our early year sector, some of which have been around outdoor learning, and our continuous work around increasing our offer to our vulnerable children through an extended offer. We're monitoring our wraparound services. We've noticed that that has declined a little bit due to COVID, but we'll keep a very close eye on that and support our schools and our early year settings to relaunch some of those offers outside of the core school hours, and we'll continue to develop our transition work. So that's some of our work in terms of our strategy. Our intentions are to further develop this over the summer holidays and work to a consultation process. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Satwinder and Phil. Really helpful. I've got a couple of questions before I open it out, and they're all around take-up. Why do you think our take-up isn't higher? We've got all of those gaps, and I suppose it'd be helpful to understand the take-up in comparable boroughs to know whether it's an H&F thing, whether that's just it's commonplace for everyone. And I suppose it would be helpful to think about how we promote and understand how we do that. You talked about improving the way that we are promoting the service. And I guess a key part of that as well is understanding who is really using the service and what we can do to reach out to groups who currently aren't in quite a notable way.
Okay, I think I can answer or help to answer that question. So our take-up is low compared to our statistical neighbours. However, our take-up has been impacted quite a lot by COVID. So just to give you some figures, our take-up of the 3 and 4 year offer has been down about 6%, and our take-up for the 2-year offer has been down by 10%. We've spoken to providers who obviously are in conversation with families on a day-to-day basis, and they're often reporting that it's down to anxieties of families about their children attending group settings. I think a lot of our families who do take up the 2-year offer in particular live in multi-generational households, and I think the anxiety of their children going to group settings and the potential risk of infection back at the home is a high concern for our families. So I think COVID has had a significant impact. Can you just remind me the second part of your question?
Of course, it was, so why is it take up higher, and what is take up in comparable boroughs, just as a marker, and then thinking about promotion and who's using the service?
Yes, so if I could just talk to you about the second part that you mentioned there. So we do have low take up pre-COVID, and we've been working with our colleagues in the Department for Education and looking at developing a take-up strategy to increase the numbers of take-up. We've identified that there are groups of the community, or groups within the community, that don't take up, particularly the 2-year offer, which is lower than 3 and 4 year offer take-up. And these are within particular areas. So we have a large Somali community within the White City ward that we're aware of, for example, who aren't taking up their free entitlement and are arranging childcare amongst their own community. What we'd like to do to support particular groups like the Somali community within the White City estate is develop a community champion approach, which we've identified in other boroughs has been quite a successful strategy at reaching out to communities to share the entitlements that are available to them from people from within their own communities. So this is something that we hope to develop further in the next academic year.
The other, if I may just add, Chair, we're also looking at developing a strategy to simplify the process so that families can access that provision more easily without having to go through the various channels that were previously in some ways caused a barrier. We're introducing the golden ticket type approach and working with DWP so that we can send families almost like a birthday card, which will bring to their attention the opportunity to access free entitlement. So that's something we're going to pilot and then scale up if that's successful.
Thank you, that's good to know. It would be really helpful from my perspective to see the comparable data from similar boroughs and also that year-on-year data as well to understand. I mean, obviously, I think we know there are always going to be fluctuations with COVID and the impact there, but it would be helpful to have that data year-on-year to see where there are fluctuations or improvements. So thank you, those were my questions. Does anyone else have any questions? Looks like not. Well, thank you. So I guess you must have answered everyone's questions with your presentation. So thank you and well done for that. Lovely. Right. Well, thank you very much to you both. Well, on that note then, I shall move on to item 9, which is date of next meeting, which is scheduled for the 16th of November 2021. And with that, I shall bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you for all of the officers for presenting. Thank you for all of the committee members and co-optees for coming along this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.